So it is now my pleasure to introduce the recipient of the Fred Kavli Distinguished Lectureship in Nanoscience, Lars Samuelson from Lund University. Professor Samuelson's talk is entitled Nanowires, From Basic Materials Research to Real-World Applications, continuing this theme of how materials can enable the applications of our future and of our today benefits. Please join me in welcoming Professor Samuelson.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, thank you for the introduction. As the previous speaker, I also came with a background of fascination for single nanopillars and visions about how one could go from the individual objects to really build functional, three-dimensional or functional assemblies of these nanorods to do some new things. I'm going to talk about the concept of nanowires. I'm a simple semiconductor physicist, so it's not going to be mechanics, it's going to be semiconductor physics and semiconductor applications. I'm going to give a survey of how our research developed from, in the very beginning, very much looking at the details of material science, materials research, and then finding out by time that it was possible to combine these bottom-up technologies with top-down lithography to actually make functioning larger units. And towards the end, I'm going to tell you some things, some visions for how I see that we will be able to bridge this tremendous gap over 7, 8, 9 orders of magnitude from the molecules and the nano devices all the way up to complete functional systems. So I come from Lund University, which is in the south of Sweden, and I'm been leading this Center for Nanoscience called the Nanostructure Consortium, and leading that for some 25 years. And besides that, I've also been involved in starting a series of companies. So what I'm going to talk about is really this mixture of basic academic research and taking these insights into real-world applications, still pretty researchy, but with some visions for how this will really be able to change our future. So these companies are dealing with, for what I'm going to talk about, of course, of course, with the materials, with the electronics. I'm going to talk about solar cells and about the light-emitting diodes. This flavor of the combination of the basic and the applied, I picked this quotation. It might not be a direct quotation from the Fred Kavli, but it's definitely in the spirit of Fred Kavli, the Norwegian-American business leader, inventor, and philanthropist who created the Kavli Institute and the Kavli Prize. This is being said, there's on the one hand applied research, and on the other hand, not yet applied research. So I think that's the flavor of almost everything we're doing. Have a very positive approach to new phenomena that people want to study in the basic research lab, because one never knows what is going to make it into applications in the future. So some of you came in and said, what the heck is, what are nanowires? One slide shows in principle what it is. They are typically long and slender objects. This is an example of an indium phosphide nanowire. It's 10 microns long, 55 nanometers in diameter, fabricated by my former student Linus Furby. Here is a chubby nanowire. This is actually gallium nitride. The nanowire is really in the core of this needle. We'll get back to these LEDs later. And then the rest is a radial functioning LED device grown by my researcher, the former postdoc Shasha B. In the historical stage, this has been around for almost 50 years, more than 50 years. It's not nano, but on the micrometer and millimeter scale. Already in the early 60s, Ellis and Wagner and the people at Bell Labs, they developed the insights and the description of how silicon whiskers could be grown stimulated by a gold seed, by which then alloyed with silicon to form a eutectic alloy between gold and silicon, and that excess silicon could that be transferred to the single crystalline wafer underneath, and this gold silicon hemisphere would be pushed up like on a piston. And it will leave behind silicon crystal, which is simply a monolithic extension of the wafer on which it grew. Then not really much happened for a long, long time. 25 years or so later, there was a group in Japan led by Dr. Kenji Hiruma at Hitachi Central Research Lab, who really showed people like me and a lot of others that it was possible to do compound semiconductor nanowhiskers or nanowires of indium arsenide, gallium arsenide, and related compound semiconductors. So this is from a paper that was published in 1991. He started this research at the end of the 80s and had to leave it at around 96, 97. Also inspired at this stage was the work that was built up at Harvard University by Charles Lieber and the group around him. For instance, very innovative ways of growing nanowires by laser ablation methods, but also very much into clever assembly, and also very big impact in the use of these nanowires for life science applications as well as for electronics and optoelectronics. When we started in 99 or 2000, at the very beginning, we spent a lot of efforts trying to understand details of how nanowires grow. It was very, very much just looking at the basic material science behind that allows nanowires to be grown. For instance, this was done inside a TEM system. So we analyzed the composition of the gold, in this case for gallium arsenide, gold-gallium mixture in the particle, and how this corresponds to details on how the nanowire is grown and how it's forming. At about the same time, we also started, inspired by actually the Nobel Prize in Physics, the year 2000, for Herbert Kromer and Soros Alfiero with the heterostructures. We and some other groups actually said, okay, let's see if we can make heterostructures in nanowires. So this was something that a breakthrough in the beginning of year 2002. Where we show that one can really combine very different, actually incompatible, not even compatible with the screen, indium arsenide and indium phosphide, which difference that is constant by almost 4%. So usually you can't grow them on top of each other, but with the slender character of the nanowires, you can really combine. Even we have shown later where materials lattice constants differ by up to 10%. So it's a way to create new combinations of materials. Here you see the short superlattice of indium arsenide and indium phosphide. So you can really do a lot of new stuff with it. Medium, maybe that's a funny name, but the medium stage in time, around 2003, that's when as I said in the beginning, we started to see that actually you can combine this self-assembly, the way nanowires formed by self-assembly processes, with patterning. So here you see two examples. This is actually indium phosphide nanowire array, and this is actually gallium nitride grown by very different techniques, but in both cases very ideal two-dimensional arrays of these nanowires can be formed with functional properties we will see later. We call this guided self-assembly. So, and then around the same time, a little bit later, we started to put nanowires to work in biology, for seeing how cells interact with these lawns or forests of nanowires, how they interact, and you can actually measure the force characteristics of the nerve cells. And we could use it also to guide outshoots of nerve cells. The other application was, for instance, in physics, where we could study single electron phenomena, for instance, to determine spin-orbit coupling in the quantum dots in the nanowires, which goes much beyond what I have time to talk about, but also examples of the uses for electronics. So, more recent stage of development, 2008, we started getting a good hold on how you can use gallium nitride-based nanowires to create LEDs, very efficient LEDs, LEDs that has larger ability to go beyond the blue and UV emission, which is characteristics for the planar LEDs we have today that need phosphorus to get the white light. Actually, we're now developing all green and also red LEDs, and I come back to that a bit later. So here's examples of such gallium nitride LEDs with a radial p-n junction, the radial quantum wells. You can barely see them. Here is a single quantum well. A bit later, but around the same time, we also started to develop nanowires for photovoltaics, solar cells, and this is work that you see illustrated here. So these are the nanowires functioning as nanophotonic antennas, very efficiently absorbing the photons and giving high efficiency also in systems with a low density of the wires on the surfaces. I'll get back to that later. On the recent stage, we started doing crazy things. 2011, it really started out as a blue sky idea of how should one think about nanowires. I call this aerotaxi. Some people say this is like the phenomenon of the flying wires. I'll get back to you. And towards the end, this is now rather chronicle, the present stage development, the challenges we see right now. To not be happy with and satisfied with having discrete small nanowire devices, but really seeing how can you, by clever self-assembling technique, can you bridge the gap from this atomic nanoscale all the way to the macro scale and also what we call productification. And then at the end, I say a little bit about something about the mission for nanowires and nanoscience, also in the spirit of the Fred Kavli for the benefit of the developing world. So I come from Lund. This is actually not a picture, this is a cartoon. It says the city of Lund in the background, the bridge to Copenhagen over here. But in the foreground, you see two important things for people in material science. Lund is now ready to start running the Synchrotron Center, the MAX 4, which is an ultra-bright synchrotron for certain areas of material science, going to be the brightest in the world. It should be fully operational in the summer, a year and a half from now. It will be actually opening on the brightest day and the brightest time of that day. It's on Midsummer Eve in 2016. They almost ready with the building now, making the beam lines. The ESS, the neutron spallation source, is just now being built. It took actually until this spring to have it fully financed by all the 17 or so countries that are many countries that are part of doing the financing. That should be operational around 2020. So the MAX 4 is actually, the building is ready. This picture was when it was about to be built ready, but you see this huge ring. And the ESS, as I said, they're at least starting to shovel earth around to make space and make the buildings for the neutron spallation source. We have a much smaller lab already. I think we have it since around almost 10 years back, Lund Nano Lab, which is a dedicated lab for nanoscience for the Nanometer Structure Consortium, which is extremely well equipped for crystal growth. We have now 5 MOCVD systems and 1 chemical beam epitaxy system. We have many advanced clean room with all kinds of patterning techniques like E-beams or focused ion beams, nano-imprint lithography, deep UV. This is used around 75% by academic users, PhD students, postdocs primarily, but also a number of smaller and larger spin-out companies and some companies that come to us. Right now, there is a very intensive collaboration with TSMC, who have a group working with us in Lund for the tunnel FETs, tunnel FETs, based on nanowires. So this is, again, maybe I'm repeating myself, this is sort of what this is all about. A combination of lithographic patterning, getting the catalytic gold particles in the case of making the VLS growth, and then growing the nanowires as monolithic extensions from the crystalline wafer. So you see 3 examples of the same structure. This is actually an individual indium phosphide nanowire. Here is a TM image in which you can actually, with some trained eyes, see that this is not the standard cubic structure. This is a hexagonal word-site structure of indium phosphide, which doesn't happen in bulk or in thin films. It happens only, you can do it in nanowires. And here's an example of the wire arrays. As I said, we were inspired by work going on in other places. I mentioned Wagner, Hiruma, Lieber. And specifically, I want to highlight Kenji Hiruma, who was really the one who kicked off this field and who inspired me. I spent part of the sabbatical in Tokyo in the mid-90s, and I kept running over to Dr. Hiruma again and again. I think he realized that I intended to go back home and start this kind of activity, which I actually did. So this is how nanowires grow. This film is actually pretty slow, so I'll help it a bit. So you have this wafer with your gold seed particles. You put it on a sample holder, you put it into the oven, you heat it up, you expose it to group 5 if it's going to grow gallium arsenide, like the arsine, and then you add the precursor for the gallium, trimethyl gallium, and then when you look carefully, believe me, this is a cartoon, so it's maybe not so interesting. But in principle, these incoming molecules, they only excite the growth just at the interface between the gold particle and the rod, and not anywhere else. So this is where we started. It gives also the flavor of where we came into this field. Namely, we put this emphasis on controlling the size, the shape, and the position of these nano whiskers. This was published in 2001. I think the language changed around 2001 from whiskers to nanowires. So from then on, we called them nanowires. So in this case, we used aerosol gold particles, and we grew them, put them in certain positions, and then we grew nanowires, preserving this pattern. So this is the gigantic group I started with. I had 4 PhD students, actually 3 PhD students and 1 diploma student, Mikael, Claes, Jonas, and Ann. And I was doing it together with Reine Wallenberg, who is professor of materials chemistry and head of the TEM Center. And working with also two persons doing the aerosol particle that were in the room behind there, Knut Eppert and Martin Magnusson, and together we developed this growth technique. So we did a lot of looking, into the material science, into very much of the details. How does the composition of the gold, in this case gold gallium particle, affect the structure of the wire that is growing underneath? And how does, for instance, cooling down under different pressure conditions affect the crystalline structure and the nature of the wires? This is, I think, the most striking with this publication is that we claimed that we were studying solid phase growth from a solid phase of the particles, which most people said that couldn't be done, but it didn't take so long until other groups showed the same type of phenomena, that it wasn't always a liquid particle, it could be a solid particle as well. We also developed in-house strong capabilities for characterization. TEM, I already mentioned, of course, a lot of luminescence and cathodoluminescence, but one important contribution was that of Anders Mikkelsen, who was then a junior postdoc. He's now a pretty well-known professor with ERC grants and all kinds of grants for his surface science and scanning probe research. So he was the one who developed the direct imaging of the atomic details of the atomic structure inside the nanowires by clever cleavage, and then looking at the details of the atomic positions, but also developed techniques to study the surfaces of nanowires with great resolution and great information back to the growers. 2 young researchers, postdoctoral researchers at that stage, both of them, Philip Kauf, who I think I saw in the corridor, and Kimberly Dick, they took on a very challenging task of being able to learn how to control the formation of the cubic and the hexagonal faces of the 3-5s. And these are 2 of the more important papers that they produced. This one is actually an example, what you see in the background from this native nanotechnology is the so-called spontaneous insertion of twin plane superlattices in zinc-blende-grown nanowires. And that has to do with the deformation of the crystalline facets of the crystalline plane interacting with the gold particle. And then there is a spontaneous insertions of rotational twin planes that gives this totem pole type of appearance. But what we're seeing down here is a unique crystal. This is all indium arsenide nanowire. So this is the diameter, this is the length direction. And here you see the crystal. What they differ, the zinc blend is really an ABC type of stacking in 1, 1, 1. And the corresponding in the verge site is AB, AB, AB in 0, 0, 0, 1 direction. And here you see a superlattice that is all indium arsenide, but with 8 monolayers of the zinc blende, 8 monolayers of the verge site, 8 monolayers of the zinc blende into a perfect superlattice, and that makes it quite an interesting system for semiconductor guys, like some of us, since these are type 2 band offsets, which means that you form these short segments, like the zinc blende, that are attractive to electrons, and the short segments that are attractive to holes, and you get pretty interesting optical and transport behaviors. I said we put a lot of effort in developing technology, processing, lithographic technology, and one of the people that contributed the strongest to that was my former student Thomas Mårtensson, who I think most of you are familiar with this scheme of taking a crystalline wafer, spinning on a resist that is sensitive to E-beams, for instance, or to imprinting. And then you can, on top of that, evaporate gold. And then with the lift-off process, you're left with these hockey pucks, we say at this time of the year, of polycrystalline gold that you can then in situ sinter into hemispheres, and then you can grow the rods with that type of structure. Thomas Mårtensson had, I think, the first papers in the literature, both for the seeding by electron beam lithography, and also the first one with nanoimprint lithography. And nanoimprint is one of those techniques that today seems to be maybe the prerequisite to really make large-scale applications. So below here you see again the indium phosphide nanowires grown by the seeding of gold particles, actually patterned by electron beam lithography. And here you see gallium nitride nanowires grown again by MOCVD, but not with gold seeded, but really selective area growth, which I mention in a few minutes. And in this case, these used patterns, typical over 2-inch wafers, are then patterned by nanoimprint lithography. Yeah, that's how it can look. So here is an example of the indium phosphide again. We can see the gold particle at the end of each of these rods. So for some of the applications, that is a very good contact point. But in other applications, like for the solar cells, you will selectively just lift off these and work on the rods without the gold. You can play games with this. This is one of the early games we played. It was done actually, Kimberly Dick had just come. That was the first project I gave her when she came from Canada to start doing her PhD. One evening, 2 weeks after he came, I said, I have this idea, maybe one can make trees. So the trees were made in the following way. In principle, we seeded growth of these trunks from a gold particle, maybe 80 nanometer gold particle or so. Top view, if we just look like a rod. And then, in this case, it was actually zinc blender, so well, don't bother about the way I said that. And then we use these rods as antennas to electrically attract gold particle from the aerosol phase. So then we could decorate these rods with smaller gold particles, say 40 nanometer diameter gold particles. And then we could go back into the growth mode, and then we could use these nanowires as substrates or crystalline substrate to grow the nanowires going out. So then you get these types of shapes. So you can play a lot of games with that. It was questionable how useful it can be. Well, the multiple branching was in this paper also suggested maybe it could be a good way to create better light absorbance for solar cells, but also for using the high density of these gold particles for, say, biomedical applications or catalytic type of applications. Less serious, but it was sort of my fantasy, was to actually use the fact that all these branches go into specific crystalline directions if you do it perfectly right, which means that it would be possible, and we demonstrated in principle that it was possible to make position-controlled nanowire networks. So what you see here are multiple of these rods, the trunks coming out, and then you see that all the branches, in principle, it's not absolutely perfect, run into the neighboring rod, and you form these cell-formed neural networks. You only do one level of patterning, like with nanoimprint lithography, and you get these billions of interconnected nodes in a neural network type of structure. The last thing of this development of the tools, of the toys with which you can do things, I mentioned the heterostructures. This was a paper that I mentioned, came out in the beginning of 2002. And I think this was pretty important since it started created a lot of interest all around the world, and many groups started to work in this direction. But I think it's quite convincing that these are really atomically sharp interfaces, or very close to atomically sharp interfaces between these different materials. You can really make, this is a resonant tunneling device, here is a superlattice device. So again, this was the first author here, Mikael Björk, who made a very strong contribution in understanding the physics of the transport of these types of devices. After his PhD, he went to Heike Riehl, who is back here, to IBM, and made, I think, a very successful career. He was there for 6 or 7 years as an employed researcher. And then he came back to Sweden. He's actually now technical director of Photovoltaics. It's an interesting loop in the world. So something about whether you think what they can be used for, I'll quickly go through that. One example of what we're doing in biology. In the back of the room, you can't read more than maybe the title, Nanowire-based electrode for acute in vivo neural recordings in the brain. It's good that you can't read more because I can't explain it. So this is done together with a well-known nano medical researcher, Jens Schoenboy, and they're really using our nanowires as electrodes to make contacts to neural systems in poor little rats or mice. And they are reading out signals from the nerve systems, and they're feeding in signals to see the response. The other example of what we are doing actually in the biomedical field relates to what Jonas Tegenfeldt is doing. And he and I developed a technology for what we call nanofluidics in hollow nanowires. Here you see an etch-out core in the core shell nanowire. And if you do this cleverly, you can actually integrate these hollow nanowires directly with microfluidic systems in this, for instance, the silicon or any substrate on top of which these are grown. And then you can have a supply of chemicals or pharmaceuticals, for instance, into this microfluidic system, and then make connections into cells and to inject and extract liquids, also with some novel designs for pumping fluids through nanotubes. So these are typical in diameters 150 to 200 nanometers, which actually allows you to penetrate often these cell walls without causing damage. I could spend an hour talking about physics, which I won't do. I decided I should not do. But an example of the things that we did at a pretty early stage, I think this is from 2004, a few electron quantum dots in nanowires. So then you had a nanowire, an indium phosphide nanowire, 2 tunnel barriers of indium phosphides, confining a quantum dot in between, or quantum disk. And this is connected to source and drain, and you have a backgate conducting silicon gate, which can gate the whole device. And the nice thing with this, after a lot of work and a lot of development, again with Mikael Björk as the primary physicist doing that, he could actually learn how to design this so you had an absolutely empty quantum dot. And then by putting an inviting positive voltage to this gate, you could invite in or lure in 1 electron, 2 electrons, 3 electrons, and we could follow exactly the voltage attractiveness you need to invite the first electron, the second electron, and then you can see here they go from the second to the third. It takes a lot of positive bias. That's because now you have to start occupying the first excited state, and this you can then, we spin up and spin down, form 4 electrons in that. And we actually did that. Had been done in planar structures before, but in this case we could actually follow from the first electron, sort of the hydrogen, to the helium, and up to 35, 40 electrons in one and the same device. That hadn't really been done before. Nano Electronics is a field that has been going on very actively. I mentioned to you what we're doing in the tunnel FET area together with the Taiwan Semiconductors and other international collaborations as well. But this is really how it started. Way back in 2005, we started a very big European project called NODE, Nanowire-Based One-Dimensional Electronics, that I had the pleasure of coordinating together with Claes Tillander, who was very much the doer in this project. So these are now epitaxially grown FET channels, field effect transistor channels of indium arsenide primarily. We looked at other materials as well, but in my part of this work, we mainly worked with indium arsenide. And then we had that surrounded by a dielectric, for instance, a high K gate dielectric, and then a wraparound gate that could then effectively electrostatically squeeze the flow of electrons in this vertical geometry from source to drain. And this is, of course, a very nice scalable technology that can be used in scale down to very small dimensions. We estimate that this will definitely be scalable down to below 10 nanometers. Exactly how far it's going to go, we don't know, but there's a lot of work going on this all over the world, including at IBM in Switzerland. So now to the more hardcore stuff related to the applications into LEDs and into solar. This is now the effort of developing LEDs in nanowires. And the background is, of course, that very much of electricity is spent to inefficient light generation, more than 20% today. And of course, if we can reduce that by a factor that consumption by a factor of 2, it means a lot to the energy consumption. I'll show some of the things here. The hardcore details you have to come back on Wednesday, where I give an invited talk in the Nanowire Symposium, gallium nitride-based nanowires for display and lighting applications. So this will be a very much softer version of that. The softness already starts here. I don't know, we have Professor Amano, Hiroshi Amano here. I saw he would be lecturing. Maybe not. Who was awarded the Nobel Prize. I happen to be in the physics class of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, so I know how this happened. So Isamu Akasaki, Hiroshi Amano, and Sri Nakamura are sharing this prize, as you know, for the invention of the efficient blue LED, which has enabled bright and energy-saving white light sources. Interesting to notice is that Amano, who I think was here today on the tutorial, is now doing a lot of research on gallium nitride nanowire-based LEDs, which brings our paths together. These things we do in the university environment, but also together with the science park, the Ideon Science Park, Forskningsbyn in Swedish. And in the foreground here, you see the Ericsson and the Sony and the big industries facilities on the other side of the freeway. But this is an important region where we take the technology and the science into the industrial environment and test its opportunities to make it all the way to the big industry. The companies that I still am coordinating science for is QNano, Photovoltaics, and Glow. And let's start with the Glow. What Glow is doing is to try to replace today's LEDs, which are typically grown on sapphire. So they're grown in the so-called C direction of the gallium nitride, vertical p-n junctions with active layers of indium gallium nitride quantum wells, multiple quantum wells. This works, as you know, pretty well. You can even get the Nobel Prize for this. They produce efficient UV LEDs and efficient blue LEDs. And they do that in spite of the fact that this material is really very low quality because of the lattice mismatch and the thermal mismatch between the sapphire and the gallium nitride. But somehow the physics of these LEDs permit these defects to be there without seriously affecting the performance. But there are still limitations. You have this is a so-called piezoelectric active direction in the wurtzite crystal structure, which tends to separate electrons and holes. So one of the electrons go to this interface for the quantum well, and the holes to the other one. And that means that you can't make the quantum wells very thick. You have to be very, very thin, which of course reduces the amount of light you can get out of them. So the idea here is to go away from two things. A, to try to get perfect crystalline structure without defects. And the second one is to grow the devices in the perpendicular direction. And we do this by two steps. First, on the gallium nitride with all these 10 to the 8, 10 to the 9 dislocations per centimeter square, we put a thin layer, a thin growth mask of silicon nitride. And then we make small openings around 100 nanometers or so. And we grow the dark blue seeds of defect-free gallium nitride nanorods. And then we switch growth mode and we do the whole device in the radial direction. Maybe that was cryptical, maybe we'll clear in the next slide. First, you see here that yes, it really works. So these are now the defect-free gallium nitride wires growing out of these holes in the growth mask. And then when we look at the details how this happens, is again Shoshabi, who is doing these investigations, looking when the initial nucleation of the gallium nitride, this is the silicon nitride mask, 100 nanometer large hole, or 80 maybe in this case. And then you can follow as a function of time how the seed starts to coming out of this hole, how this single crystalline object starts to develop different interesting features of the facets. And then when you, after this nucleation, you have now a structure with these planar M facets that are the non-polar directions. And then all the facets and all the growth is really happening at the very top of the wire. So a device, an LED, we can be comprised of many, many such LEDs. So each of these little pencil-like structure is a complete LED, gallium nitride with a radial p-n junction, with its multiple quantum wells and electron blocking layer just as in the planar LEDs. And the structure you see here, an N-type core and the radial NIP with the quantum wells. So these make it into complete dies like this, with a cathode connecting to the gallium nitride N layer that you seed the growth from, and then the anode is contact to the P spreading contact, principal ITO that wraps around each of these LEDs. So each of these is a complete LED, and you have typically maybe 100,000 for a bright LED, depending on how much light you want. In some cases, we make LEDs with only one nanowire, which is interesting in some nanophotonic applications that I won't have time to show you. As I said, the 2-inch nano-imprint lithography works extremely well. Here you see an example of the gallium nitride LED grown on a 2-inch sapphire. So here is what we're doing today, GLOW in Sunnyvale, where the system development is, and the long-term research is conducted in Lund still. Efficient blue, but also efficient green, similar efficiency as with the blue. That's very good. And the task that I have now in Lund, sharing with Bo Monomer, who's sitting over there, is to see we will also be able to make as efficient yellow and red. Some people have hesitation, but we are optimists, and we think we're going to be there within not too long time. But the development of the systems with the blue and the green is directed now in Sunnyvale in Silicon Valley by Nate Gardner, who was previously with Philips Lumelab. So to the solar. Nanowire arrays for solar cell applications. The background is, of course, that solar energy is really the only source of energy that we have abundant. Compared to all other sources of nuclear or oil or gas, they are really extremely minute. But we have this enormous influx that's being stated in this way, that every hour the Earth receives from the sun, energy from the sun, corresponding to the Earth's entire annual energy consumption. So I realized that with building up solar panels, either on buildings or maybe power plants in the sun-rich parts of the world, like Southern Europe or Sahara or Southern US, etc., you could really have continuous supply of solar energy that can be distributed to the entire world. This is, unfortunately, a very busy slide. The only good thing with it is, and most of you have seen it before, this is from the NREL, the Renewable Energy Lab in the US, with efficiency plotted vertically from 0, 10, 20, 40, 50% efficiency versus time. Here it says 1975, here it says 2015. And you have the well-known contributors to this, like the single crystalline silicon, which is the blue stuff here, yes, single crystalline silicon, that for the market is typically in the range 18, 19%. You have some master technologies that bring silicon beyond 20, maybe 21, 22% or so, which is, of course, a fantastic achievement. And then you have the gallium arsenide nanowires, planar structure still, where you can get up to more than 30% in efficiency. And then if you do dual junction or multiple junction solar cells, still with a single sun power without concentration, that has been demonstrated to go up to high 30s. So what we're doing is to build on something that we developed a few years ago, where we, in a European project called Arm-on-Ra, funded by the European Union, to get Lund together with University of Kassel for theory, Fraunhofer Solar Energy Center, and Photovoltaics, where we developed a technology where we reached, before the project closed, 14% in efficiency. And we had set the target to do 10%, and what was published before we did that was 4% from a Japanese group. So it was quite a successful project, and we are pretty certain that this technology, where we have now about 15%, both for indium phosphide and gallium arsenide, will be able to bring for thin films in the range from 18%, that we're pretty certain of, in this range, 18 to 35%. And there is a sales pitch saying that with these nanowire array solar cells, we can bring to the market single crystal 3-5 solar cells to the cost of thin films. So this is a little bit the proof of the pudding, at least for this European project, where we should deliver 10, and we did 13.8 in this science paper that came a year and a half ago. So what is interesting here is that it was a lot of really based on theoretical design, how do you make the ideal pitch, how do you make the ideal diameters, dimensions of the nanorods, and how do you ideally distribute the dopants in a PIN junctions, where each of these is a complete PIN junctions. And that gave us this 13.8, although we were only covering 12% of the surface. So this is not fake, one could think so, it's not. And that has to do with this design of the nanophotonic antennas, that although you only cover 12%, it's been demonstrated that at least 95% of all the incoming photons make it into these nanorods, into the waveguides, and are then contributing to the solar cell. So this is how we celebrated this. You see the same graph again on our coffee mugs. I use it also as a background for saying that the next stage, we hope to be able to do a nano tandem project, where we'll add a flexible layer of nanowires to lift standard silicon solar cells from typically 18 to 20% to this 26+% in efficiency, which we think is going to make a big contribution in the future. So the last thing I'll talk about is the flying wires, the aerotaxi, and I'll give a little bit about the background. So let me just summarize what it is. There's an extremely fast growth of nanowires that are at least typically a factor of 100 faster than conventional crystal growth. And we do that in a continuous process of growing these nanowires. Is not a batch base, so it's a continuous process. It is very different from conventional semiconductor growth, obviously. So this all started out as, among crystal growers. Do we know what we're doing? Maybe we don't know what we're doing. And I was bothering people around me. We were also convinced that if you have a 1-1-1 substrate, if the nanowires grow perpendicular, that's all very fine, the seeded growth. But if you grow on a 0-0-1, like this plane here, the wires will still grow in the 1-1-1, and of course that will be controlled by this interface. And my question to the people around me was that maybe this is not at all the way it works. Maybe if you allow me to get from you a little nano tweezer, so I could hold a gold particle diameter 50 to 80 nanometers or so, and if you could also allow me, or you, to insert this nano tweezer into the MOCVD machine, I said, I bet we're going to form the same supersaturated gold gallium alloy to growing gallium arsenide. And I bet that this system is going to find a low energy, an ideal nucleation spot, and I bet it's going to grow in the 1-1-1 direction. This will not, as I said, be limited by the stagnant layers typically you have on the wafers, but this is going to be a particle and a wire that can interact with all the molecules surrounding it. So the nano trees are actually, people said, no, you're not going to get that from us. So we sat down, we thought, what can we do instead? Well, what we could do instead was to take a hot wall furnace, where you typically grow nanowires, but then you'd grow it on the wafer, as I showed you in the beginning. But now we would send in size-selected gold particles and let them flow through in a carrier gas very slowly. So they will flow through. Typically, it would take a second for the gold particles to flow through, and at the end, you would collect whatever was grown. Maybe that was 10 nanometers, maybe it was 50 nanometers. Indeed, what we found was that it grew much, much faster than that. We found that in 1 second, we grow 1 micron of gallium arsenide. This gallium arsenide was perfectly single crystalline under these first experiments in a very crummy home-built system. It were all zinc blender. Later we found that we can manipulate that and control that as well. But as I said, the growth rate was tremendously high, about 50 to 1,000 times faster than for normal epitaxial growth. So this is sort of again a simulation, an animation, how this works. So we have again the gold particles, the size-selected gold particles. They flow through this furnace. They interact with the trimethyl gallium that alloys with the gold and the arsine, and out comes gallium arsenide nanowires. So when we've done that, we said, oh, this is interesting. Maybe we shouldn't publish this. So we sat down and wrote a lot of IP, but we couldn't stay away from it too long. So 9 months later, we did submit it, and that was where it was published. I'll get to that in the next slide. So, but this is how this is how we present it to the VCs, the investors. See, it's extremely well controlled, and we understand everything about it. Well, that's not what we told the Wallenberg Foundation. We didn't tell that either to Nature. We said this is a lot of known things, but also a lot of unknown. So this opens a new field of crystal growth of materials research. So this is the paper that came in December 2012. 6th of December, continuous gas phase synthesis of nanowires with tunable properties, and my student Magnus Heolin is up there. This was again collaboration with Photovoltaics in this case. So when I use this as a background to go to the Wallenberg in English, Wallenberg Foundation in Sweden, we got funded by I think $6 million to really try to find out how it works. And one of the things we're doing is to look inside the TEM from a gold particle exactly how do we nucleate the gallium arsenide nanowire, and how do these nanowires grow under the beam. So this is a home-built system. Right now we are purchasing a state-of-the-art environmental TEM, again with funding from the Wallenberg Foundation. We're also using this very generous funding to build, I thought we published a Nature paper with a very crummy home-built system. Now we have designed and had built for us, I would say, if there is state-of-the-art, because we're the only one who have it, Aerotex, a growth system. We produce now very, very nice, much nicer than in this original paper, chopstick-like nanowires, several microns, 2 to 4 microns long. And inside this chamber, we now have built the Gen 3.5, in which we have 2 growth zones, where we can also make p-n junctions. So now we have this continuous growth of tremendous amount of wires, all being sort of collected in buckets to later to be used for whatever applications we have. Photovoltaics is not satisfied with what we're doing in the university. They really want very quickly to scale things up to be able to do pre-pilot. This is, there should be a little person here actually. This is 5 meters tall. So you can imagine that, and this also tells you that this is now done in vertical geometry. Right now they have 6 growth stages built in this system to be able to do different contact regions, p-n junctions, passivations, and everything. It's not fully up to operation yet, but I think very soon, around the end of December, it should be fully operational. So I will conclude with also almost where I started. We have these fantastic properties of designable, perfect individual nanowire devices. And how do we bring them to something that should be a square meter or tens of square meter, for instance, for solar panels? How can we bridge the 7 to 9 orders of magnitude from nano devices to systems and allow that also for production? That's a big challenge. We are not the only ones who realize that. Half a year ago or so came this call from DARPA that they call Atoms to Product, A2P. And they were talking about very similar things as we have been working on for a while in the lab. They say, how do we get from the atomic scale with atoms, molecules, and nano devices? I like their illustration, by the way. This is DARPA's image. And there's this big challenge in the assembly gap. How do you get from 10 to the minus 9 or maybe 10 to the minus 7 for the devices? How do you get that all the way up to the millimeter range for discrete devices, components, and subsystems, and then to go all the way to macroscopic applications? So that is what the DARPA is now having a call for, the assembly gap from the atomic to products. And for many applications, the wafer-grown nanowire devices still may have opportunities. I gave some examples of the LEDs, for instance. But for cost-critical applications like solar panels, I doubt that this can be done. But definitely, with the efficiency of nano-imprint lithography and possible reuse of the wafers, it is still one of the opportunities. But what is, I think, even more interesting as an opportunity right now is if we could benefit from this tremendously high materials fabrication offered by the flying wires by a skillful assembly of ensembles of nanowires. So that's what we're working on right now at the university, but also in the company Photovoltaics. We're doing that as a joint next challenge. And this actually resembles the DARPA picture, but we have, again, discrete devices, collections of large numbers of nanowires produced with this very efficient production scheme. So the aerotaxi brings this into a feedstock where you have dispersed in a liquid all these nanowires. And what you want to do is to controllably assemble these into the perfect arrays for the solar panels or for whatever application you have. You need to do alignment, you need to form ideal films, and then go all the way to integration. So I just flashed to you two approaches that we've been working on for the last half year or so. One is the alignment by nanowire surface modification. This is not the ideal picture, but I think you can see what this is. Now you see nanowires where the orientation has been obtained with surface modification. So you have a gold particle, you have a semiconductor, the rest you can guess, at least if you're a chemist. And also in this case, you can actually build in the spacing between the nanowires. The second approach that we are working on right now that also looks very promising is what we call alignment by E-field. Here you see, maybe you could see it in the back also, that with an electric field of the order of 10 volts or so over this cell, you actually go from horizontally lying wires to them standing up like this. So now they're lying down, and suddenly, flip, they're all standing up like this. Some we call this the electronic blue pill movie, maybe. Yeah, you can bleep that. That was the comment that I got the other day. So that looks like one of the interesting opportunities. And with this, we think we will enable the efficient assembly of aerotaxi-produced nanowires into meter-scale panels for solar cell, but also for other applications like lighting. So this brings me to my concluding comments. I said I will end with a mission for nanoscience, for the nanowires, for the benefit of the developing world. I think I've shown, or we have shown, that nanowire technology offers unique opportunities for creation of energy, also when you're far away from the grid, in areas of the world where you don't have rich access to electricity. And this, of course, gives you energy that you can use, for instance, for communication systems, which is a very important task right now, but obviously also to create low voltage lighting, very compatible also with the energy systems for the solar panels and the driving the LEDs, both for indoor and outdoor lighting. With the related technology, we're right now also developing the nanowire LEDs into UV emitting, to actually go into these UVC bands between 250 and 280 nanometers for water purification, to give the world drinkable water wherever you happen to be living. And of course, a lot of the lab on chip, I indicated before, there's a lot of lab on chip that would be suitable to monitor disease situations for people also in rural areas, but also control of water quality and things like that. I can say also right now, Lund Nano Lab is building a pre-pilot process line for R&D towards product, and building what we call, leading to what we call a nanowire foundry. And where should that be if not in Lund? We think that's where it should be. So I've now been reporting 15 years of research, many areas of research with a lot of dedicated coordinating senior research, many PhD students, a lot of people being involved in the details of the growth of nanowires, in modeling, in patterning and particles, in microscopy of different types, optical characterization, quantum transport, processing, and you name it, nano-opticals and all these things. So all these people have contributed tremendously, specifically the senior people are listed here with the different responsibility areas. So I will conclude by thanking the people that allowed this to happen. Below this line are the agencies that have, during 15 years, supported the research in the university. Actually, we checked that recently. We have spent, maybe we should feel ashamed, 1 billion Swedish krona. I guess that's like 140 million US dollars for the basic research behind this. But it's interesting to see that there is a balance. Above the line are the people that invested into the companies, specifically in Glow and Photovoltaics, also in this case the same amount of money. So it's interesting also to see, also connecting to where I started, how the basic research is supporting innovation and possible industrial development. That technology typically goes back and supports the physics and the basic research. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention and answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I really like the full circle that you brought from innovation and basic research. I apologize, but due to the time, I'm going to have to ask folks to hold their questions or capture you outside and also go to your other talks while here. But I want to again thank you and congratulate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That concludes our session here. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the meeting and the exhibits, the talks, and the Career Center and other activities. Thank you.